Tom, Ruby, Morris, I want you to meet my friend Cindy. I was originally going to Cindy at the table, but I forgot to save her space. So I'll find a random spot. I want her to sit with
How's Jeff?
people that I know. Oh, so, yeah, so there you go. Hey there. Whoa, sorry. I'm good. How are you?
Hi, Ruby. How are you? Good to see you.
Okay. I found a park.
Well, the fact Mark is working with you, that's an unheard of. That's a World War II. Yeah. The press. I don't know. There's I don't
was so funny. Yeah, I ran into Chuck was driving and I know the dog. And then he started face on. He's like, hey, and he's asking about Harvey cars. But just for a minute, I was thinking who was this other Harvey guy. And I think I called him that. And then as soon as he drove away, I went, oh my God, that's Chuck. Yeah. And I told Alan, I'm like, I swear sometimes I got the memory of a rock. I don't know. That's a bunch down there. I'm out there down there. We're in the snow up here. I didn't want to make a big deal out of it and like send you a message saying, would you go to come out with me? I did. So Andrew and they're both kind of they're both sober. They both have the same personality. So I just for a second mixed them up. I know better to throw out names when I'm not 100%, right? Until it clicks in. He literally drove away and I went, okay. Well, and then I didn't want to like text you because I don't have his number to say I know who you are. It was just embarrassing. I have to remember to keep my mouth shut. It was. I was embarrassed, but I'm glad you got a kick out of it. The worst part of it all is it's not the first time I've done these. In fact, I do it so often that I start to question my brain cells. I'm like, really? You're gonna do this to me? I don't mind. No, I absolutely knew who I was talking to. I just applied the wrong first name. Well, you know, that was what I had. The new one. Yeah, you know, I bought the new one. And I don't know if it's like by proxy for me, but I still have the same proxy. Not that much, so I'm like, yeah, maybe I need to do some crossword or something. You know, I wasn't on the road now until later. My dad, he was always, he was smart. Because he was just like, you know, he's always reading a book and just had no influence, you know, just flatline and he wasn't around. But in the last 10 years, he lives in New York right now, and I just say that he's got this I think I'm just getting old, you know, too. I'm getting older. I'm not that old. So we need to do some crossword puzzles or something. So that I can find my work and place to travel. You do? I think I can bring it in. That's why I am going to do it with water. And I already know a little bit of French. I know some sign language. So, and it makes them really tough. Italian? Your dog's trained in that too. How much do you have? And you train it? So the big dog in the car. That's what like I was like scared of headlights as soon as I saw that dog and then Jack in the car. It was Andrew in the car.
Well, good evening, everyone. If we could find our seats, that would be great.
All right, so
well, thank you. Thank you for coming tonight and good evening. Latah Recovery Center is in its 6th year of operation. It's been growing as a community of hope, value, and dignity for those who are in constant fight with mental illness, drug addiction. And did you know that all services are free or at cost? And almost entirely provided by passionate, dedicated volunteers, some of which are here tonight. And I encourage you to look at the calendars on your table to find out more about some of the programs and what's going on at the Recovery Center. It's just truly fabulous. And not to steal any of Daryl's thunder, but this past year, many support groups were attended by nearly 7,090 different individual attendees or experiences. That is amazing. So thanks for coming. I am Paul Kimmel, Business and Public Affairs Manager with Avista, and I'm really delighted to help MC this tonight. And welcome for those of you streaming in. I think we do have some streaming in, don't we, Melissa? Great, okay. So it's so good to see you and to be seen. And really, this is the first outing for many of us, isn't it? Let me see a show of hands. It's like, okay, it's kind of good, isn't it? It's like, let's remember how to socialize. I think we can do it safely, too. So let's celebrate that, too. Daryl, your board and staff, so many volunteers, congratulations. Another year of incredible service, programming, and really changing this community for the good. The work you do is not easy, but so critical. And we're here tonight to hear about more of that from a number of people, some great testimonies and really some great board members sharing their stories. Desmond Tutu once said, "Hope is being able to see that there is light despite all the darkness." Think about that. That's what the Recovery Center really does. It provides that light in the darkness so well. So, Daryl, your staff, your volunteers, thank you. Thank you for being that light. This level of behavioral health that we see here would not be possible without the help of our volunteers, our financial supporters, and so many people like you. So I want to recognize a few of you here tonight, and especially our law enforcement and EMS community. Some of you are here in the audience, so thank you so much. Again, you are kind of the first line of defense and support for these people, so thank you. We'd like to also recognize Gritman Medical Center and CEO Care Best and Board Chairman Craig White for their sponsorship of this fundraiser and continuing support and partnership. It's really important. Several members of the Gritman team might be here as well, so thank you all. And the lovely flowers tonight by Roxanne. She is incredibly creative and artistic with her floral arrangements. I'd also be remiss if I didn't mention the outstanding support the center has received from the Latah County Commissioners. And I do know of one former commissioner here, Commissioner Tom Stroshine. So let's give him and all the others that I recognized earlier a round of applause. And Tom, you're still sporting that nice haircut. I appreciate it. My mentor.
Likewise, fellow commissioner.
For the second year in a row, we also have a generous donor who stepped up and agreed to sponsor this entire event, and that is Idaho, and we want to thank them. They agreed to sponsor this tonight, so all of the proceeds from tonight will go toward programming and recovery services, so we're really appreciative of that. But even better, Optum has agreed to sponsor the National Mental Health Month activities in May, as well as National Recovery Month activities in September. And if you remember the 100 signs that Recovery Center placed around town, and the statements on them, people love them. We saw them walking in tonight, and really, Daryl, well done. And the support that Optum provided for that, again, I think that's a great best practices, and hope that continues in the future as well. And again, I want to recognize the volunteers and staff right now, so please stand and be recognized, if you would. Any volunteers and staff members here right now? Thank you. So with that, I want to recognize Daryl, You shouldn't have sat down here. Come on up. And he's got a few things to share, and we'll continue on with this program. So, Daryl Kine. And I was telling Melanie Zimmer earlier, I was like, Daryl has found his lane in this community, right?
Hope so. Yeah. So I always like to talk numbers, but Paul already talked my numbers. We serve about 7,000 people every year. That's not 7,000 individuals, by the way. We get a lot of repeat customers. People come, sometimes people come every day, or sometimes I come to 2 services, 2 programs in one day, and we count them twice that we did that. So it's not 7,000 individuals. I want to be really clear on that. But 7,000 client contacts every year. If you were to look at the calendar that's on each of your tables, you'd see that we have something going every day. And in fact, we have 25 different support groups, educational groups, social groups going every week. We always have something going on at the Recovery Center. But like I said, I don't want to talk numbers. I want to talk about how unique some of our offerings are. One of the things that we were able to help bring to our community last year is the Rural Crisis Center Network. What that is a 24/7, 365-day a year behavioral health crisis facility. And I can't even begin to do it justice if I talk for an hour, so I'll talk for less than a minute on it. That was an attempt of So what that is we partnered with the Rural Crisis Center Network, and they've got some others throughout north central Idaho that are helping people to stay out of prison, out of jail. They're staying out of the ER, and instead they're able to receive more appropriate treatment for up to 23 hours and 59 minutes at a crisis center, getting basically to the front of the line for counseling. And what that means for you guys, frankly, is savings as taxpayers, because if a police officer has to take somebody to the ER, for instance, and put them on a 72-hour hold, police officers have to stay there the entire time. If they bring them to us and they're appropriate for the Rural Crisis Center Network, the police stay with us for an hour, maybe 2 hours while they're getting checked in and make sure everything's safe, but then the police can go on about their business. And so it's great for us as a taxpayer, but it's also great for our people because they're being treated in a more humane and frankly more restful and appropriate environment than an ER. I don't know if everybody here has been in an ER, but when I've been in an ER, it's the last place you want to go for quiet and rest, which is something that most folks that are dealing with behavioral health issues would benefit from. And what I really want to emphasize, though, is how unique that program is. The idea of a crisis center is not unique at all. In fact, we've got 9 or 10 of them in Idaho. But the way that we're doing it, wherein we have a rural approach to it, we don't always have it staffed. Instead, what we do is we wait for a call from a central dispatch, and then we bring all the staff in. That's highly unique. In fact, it is so unique that we got a call about 2 weeks ago, our business partner, the Rural Crisis Center Network, and myself, from, I think it was Maine, and they wanted to know how we do it so that they could copy us. So I wanted to let you guys know how unique that is. And that's crisis. So what we have is we have a crisis center for the day, where they can stay for, like I said, up to 23 hours and 59 minutes. In fact, they can stay longer if they're still in crisis. We don't kick them out. We walk them out the door, we walk them back in the door, and we admit them for another episode of care for another day if need be. And that's happened for up to a week, I think. So it's not a hard limit on 24 hours. So we've got crisis for the day, and then recovery is for life. You know, people that are battling behavioral health issues, they don't just go away. They have to fight them every day. And you'll hear more about that from some other speakers. They'll do far better than anything I could talk about. But imagine holding your breath as long as you can, then needing to hold it for another minute. That's what they're doing. So that's the recovery center side, the crisis center side. I'm not going to talk any more numbers, but I do want to tell you a story. And then I'll get out of the way. Story. 1 year ago, I sat up here at this fundraiser, and we had this room full of 450 people. And I remember that I'd gotten a few calls that day, and some folks weren't going to come because there was this thing going around town, and they were a little worried about it. I thought they were overreacting. I may have been wrong. So we had a great event. What a difference a year makes, huh? About 2 weeks after that, I started noticing that things in Idaho and throughout the nation were starting to close down due to this virus. So I contacted the city of Moscow because they were saying, you know, I need to know, are we an essential business? Because that term was a new term to me, and I didn't know what the guidelines were for that. So I contacted the city of Moscow, I emailed them and I said, hey, I think that this virus is gonna cause Moscow to close down pretty soon. And I wanna know if we're an essential business. By the way, I think we are, because I don't think that my folks are dealing with addictions and mental health issues will do very well at all if we isolate at home. Heard back a couple days later from the city of Moscow, we were an essential business, so we got to stay open. About 2 weeks later, I was walking out of our shop at the corner on Main Street, and I took a look to the north. So I was looking from 6th straight north on 95, you know, right through the heart of downtown. And it was noon. Anybody ever find parking in downtown Moscow at noon? Well, last March you would have. I saw 2 cars. That was it. Most of the businesses were closed. We were open. We were having, as best as we could, regular meetings and regular support for folks, because we were an essential business and we were able to, and because we believed that the service we provide was that important to people. So, a couple days after that, a young woman comes in, it's one of our regulars, young mother. And she's looking around, and we hadn't seen her for a few days, and she said to me, thank God you guys are open. I'm not isolating well. And if I stay home, I know I will lose my baby. What a difference a couple of days makes. So at that point, I knew that whatever we had to do to stay open was what we needed to do. And we haven't missed a day. Think about that. What a difference your support of us can also make. Thank you all.
Thanks, Gerald. Great story. So we're going to take a few minutes now. There's dessert back there, so get up and help yourself and come back to your tables. Enjoy a little dessert, and then we're going to see a video in a few minutes. So for right now, go ahead and enjoy some ice cream and some toppings. And we'll see you in a few.
Do you want me to get you some?
They got sprinkled. Yeah, I'm all So you're a minister? Oh, okay, I misunderstood.
Start drinking so I can go.
I don't care, I'm drinking it. Just water.
Yeah, because I want to learn how to crochet and calm my mind.
So the Presbyterian Church is your church. Like the Oregon scene, which I heard you not hear. I said, I heard you not hear her because the way you landed it.
I'll take it where I see.
Yeah, it's hard, especially when I'm pretty deaf. Well, so, is it a pipe organ or original?
birthday, because I came out and helped
Loving food and it came
my
out
dad
nice.
pour concrete, you know, and build a shop in June. And I guess, I mean, they said they were the
And I have a
toughest
meatloaf.
bunch of
So as you continue enjoying your dessert tonight, we're going to share a short video with you regarding how peer recovery support actually works. It's a great video, so we'll cue that up. And again, the center here provides the same support for people living with mental health and addiction issues. So thanks, let's roll.
The downtown east side of Vancouver, British Columbia is one of the world's ground zeros for addiction, in that in a few square block radius we have thousands of people injecting, inhaling, and ingesting drugs of all kinds, and paying dearly for addiction. In that in a few square block radius we have thousands of ingesting drugs of all kinds, and paying dearly for it. Block radius, these people, thousands of, are often drugs of all beset by many medical problems, and paying dearly for it. The injection drug use are often, including psychosis, by many cancers, and they die of overdoses. This is trench warfare, and the people that are cancer, people affected by addiction. So that's where I worked for 12 years. This is trench warfare, and the people that are could be summed up really very affected by addiction. So that's where choice that anybody makes. It's not a weakness of character, it's not a failure of will, it's just how our society depicts addiction. Brain disease, which is not a weakness of character, it's not a failure of will to see it, but it actually is a response to humans. I worked with a weakness of severely traumatized tendencies to see it, but it actually is a response. All the men had been emotionally severely neglected, and all the women, acknowledged from my perspective, all the men would be scientific. Neglected, and all the women, acknowledged from my perspective, all the men would be choice. Scientific. It actually is. And all the women, acknowledged from my perspective, also had already been in science practice for 20 years. Quite a adult psychology and adult brain. The depth really adult psychology dramatized and confirmed for addiction suffering, and that would be adult psychology dramatized in response to addiction is not judgment. Aggressive or manipulative or unpleasant. But again, there's no sense of the reality of these people. Manipulative as to what that's really all about for unpleasant. Is it possible to cure people? Sense of where I am the expert and you're the one with the disease and I'm going to cure you. Is it possible to cure people like you cure a piece? I am the answer to that question, and framed that way, is no. I'm going to cure you. If you're asking, is it possible for people to heal from to that question, they don't frame that way, is no. I'm going to cure you. If you're asking, is it possible to lessen the suffering of the trauma? Yes. the question is under what conditions is that possible? If you ask him, is for people to bear. Now they have to soothe their pain with substances or other compulsive behaviors. Then the trauma itself, given that the human brain develops an interaction with the environment, shapes the brain circuitry in such a way that the person will be more likely to find relief from the drugs. So the very physiology of the brain is affected by the trauma. So then you take these traumatized people and you make their habit illegal. It's not illegal to drink yourself to death. It's not illegal to make yourself sick with emphysema or lung cancer by means of cigarettes, but it's illegal to use other substances. So now you take these abused, traumatized people, you place them outside the law, you put them in jails, and you harm them all their lives, treating them like criminals and bad people and failures and rejects and less than human. And then we wonder how come they don't get better. So it's a self-perpetuating cycle of taking traumatized people and then re-traumatizing them, and then hoping at the same time, why don't they listen? Why don't they get better already? Why don't they give it up? Well, they don't give it up because the more hurt they are, the more they need to escape. In other words, the addiction wasn't your problem. Your problem is that you had a lot of emotional pain, you didn't know what to do with it. So the addiction was really an attempt to solve the problem. So when you say, why do people use substances, or why do they engage in addiction in general, it's because they have a problem they don't know what to do with. And if you really understand their addiction, we have to ask, well, what gave you so much emotional pain? And how come you didn't have the internal resources? This is not a judgment, it's simply an inquiry. How come you lacked at some point the internal resources to deal with that pain in a more creative, forward-looking way that would help you resolve the pain rather than to perpetuate it? So really what it was is that the addiction came along to help you solve a problem you had no other solutions for at the time. And that's the case for all addictions. So why do people use, why do people engage in addictions? Because they have deep emotional problems they don't have the means to resolve on their own. That's why they use. The average medical student, until very recently, has never even heard the word trauma in their education. It doesn't show up. We don't talk about it. We don't talk about its impact on the brain, on the personality, on the emotional life of people, on its impact on people's physical health. It's not a word that we mention. We're traumaphobic. As a fellow doctor said to me, the medical profession is traumaphobic. Psychiatrists these days are trained mostly in this biological model of psychiatry where everything comes down to a biological brain disease. Here, let's give you a pill. The last thing most psychiatrists know how to talk about is actually emotional pain or its origins in human experience. You think they know how to do that, but they don't. They're not trained in it. It's not part of the predominant medical ideology. And you know, as a physician, I can tell you, we like to think of medical as a science, and it has certainly great scientific achievements to its credit and great scientific insights to buttress its successes. But it's as much as ideology as a science. And ideology has certain hidden assumptions that are hidden from the people that believe in ideology. And so that if something is excluded by your ideology, you just won't see it. And so that you can be talking to somebody about your addiction, and the simple question, what did they do for you? And how come you're in so much emotional pain? Doesn't occur to anybody, you know, trained in a classical manner. Now, this is true not just for physicians, it's true for a lot of psychologists as well, who are more interested in solving your problems and getting you to overcome the behavior than in asking, well, okay, where does the behavior come from? And what are you still carrying inside that's making you behave that way? And how can we help you resolve what's inside you Not just how do we help you change your behavior, but how do we help you change? Now that's what healing is. And that happens inside a person. So it's never a question of anybody curing anybody else, but we can guide people to healing if we ask the right questions.
Quite a video. The impressive results that Daryl shared earlier, the societal savings that our community realizes, really the lives changed and saved, wouldn't be possible without the direction of a wonderful board of directors. And in order to maintain that authenticity of the board and the representation in the local recovery community, the members of this board are required to be in some form of behavioral health and recovery themselves. And it's really kind of living, walking the walk, talking the talk. The center is supported by a dozen volunteers, about 100 or 200 hours per month. So they're led by a professional staff. Many for several years now, they have stayed with this program because they believe in it. And I want to recognize both our board members, if you would stand right now, please. Thank you. Thank you all. And then the staff and volunteers again, Casey, Colleen, Ashton, Aaron, Amber, Cindy, Carly, Sean, and again, all those volunteers, thank you. So at this time, I want to bring up Greg Mann, my twin brother from another mother. And Greg is the board president of the Recovery Center, and he has a few comments for us. So welcome, Greg.
Good evening. I'm Greg Mann, and I serve as the chairman of the board of directors for the Latah Recovery Center. I want to extend a very special thank you to all of you for supporting our community recovery center. I'd also like to take a moment to reflect on what we went through as a board over the last year. A year ago, we had a very successful breakfast, and it wasn't long after that that the pandemic hit, and we began wondering what would happen if this thing were to continue over till next year. How would we do? What would we do without the breakfast? Because the breakfast and the funds that we receive from the breakfast cover a huge percentage of our operating budget. And we thought, oh, by then it'll be gone away. It'll be go away. You know, we'll be okay. But it didn't, and it continued to get worse and worse. So finally in January, we had to make a decision. What are we going to do? And we said, Daryl, why don't you go out to the Best Western and visit with Corinne Ritter and Melanie Zimmer to see what kind of ideas that they would have as far as holding something live. We knew we could do a virtual event, but we just didn't think it was going to have quite the impact that it does with a live presentation. And Melanie used to serve on our board as our treasurer, and she knew how important this event was. And thanks to her and Karina, they were able to come up with a plan, working with Daryl, and this is the result of what they did. And it wouldn't have happened without them. And Melanie, would you please stand so that we can give you a thank you, because you're here. It's also, I think, important where we talk about the board of directors, and a number of us have to be in recovery. 10 years ago, I came to terms with my addiction to alcohol, and I've been sober ever since. So this has meaning to me, and it's an honor to have the privilege to serve in the role that I have. It is now my pleasure to introduce to you Bonnie and Andy Boyd. Bonnie and Andy have been residents of Moscow for the last 30 years. They met at the Moscow Food Co-op where Bonnie was employed and Andy was a student at the University of Idaho. They come to us today as members of the mental health community, as their son, Matthew, has been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia and depression. They will talk about their unique journey with Matthew and how the community is a vital part of their solution.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks for having us up here. We're going to set our little timer so we don't bore you to death.
And you know this must be really important to me, or I certainly wouldn't be standing up here. As public speaking is not my forte.
We believe that tonight's and this morning's events are very important to our community. Mental health issues as well as drug dependency issues are certainly vital services that are needed in any community. Our stories in the mental health, our son Matthew, was heading through high school, got his Eagle Scout, graduated, got into U of I, started to volunteer at the fire department, living there, and things started to get a little different. He was having issues keeping up with his schoolwork. His attitude was changing a little bit.
His conversations were certainly changing a little bit, to the point where I was starting to get quite concerned. I'm all about discussing, aliens and them, whoever they are, but it became apparent that to Matthew, they were becoming very real.
So we ended up dropping out of the fire department because the school was suffering somewhat, and then and he still kept declining in the school area as well, and he dropped out of that. Ended up getting a girlfriend and working at a coffee shop for a while, but that started not working out as well either, and in 2010 he finally had a psychotic break where he was hearing women screaming. I mean, there was a couple times where we were living in town here, and I went outside in the middle of the night, and he's out screaming out into the night sky that I hear you, I will help you. And he was perceiving women screaming, and that there's a rape ring in Moscow, and that he was basically the person sent to discover this and bring it to light. And so obviously this was a little bit disconcerting to us. Obviously it was disconcerting to Matthew as well.
And the neighbors.
So at this time, Matthew had been living in an apartment, but after he lost the job at the coffee house, he ended up moving back with us, and that's when he started having those types of issues, and we were seeing it more clear. And being that Matthew was 18, we really had no ability to really help him. He wasn't at a point where he's like, oh yeah, sure, I have schizophrenia.
He wasn't even diagnosed with that.
Yeah, so we were still just, how do we get him diagnosed? How do we get him help? And at this time it was 2010, and there was no recovery center. And so obviously that would have been an asset to, to Bonnie and myself, because we might have come down and asked, certain questions, how do we handle this type of situation? What's the best thing to do? How do you manage somebody that, doesn't understand what's happening or what he's visualizing in his head may not be happening in other people's reality. So this went on for some time, and then we ended up having a trip that Bonnie and I went on to visit our daughter who was living in California at the time, and granddaughter. And Matt was going to stay behind and watch the house and the dog, but unfortunately the day before we left, we ended up putting our dog down. And that kind of hit Matt hard. And Matt was somewhat self-medicating at the time with alcohol to kind of deal with the screens, because that kind of dampened some of that for him. We weren't sure if we should go on the trip, but we ended up doing it. And 2 days later, we got the call that he got a DUI, hit a couple of cars, hit a tree, walked away from the incident. And so this was kind of a start for Matthew into the system, as we like to call it. Because of that, he ended up having to do 1 year of counseling with a drug counseling therapist. So that was a good start for him.
But I have to add
Go
here
ahead.
that thank goodness for a small community, and people that you get to know as the person that bailed him out, the bail bondsman, used to work for Andy at the recycling center, and the officer that worked with him, I used to be a dispatcher for almost 9 years. So, small world. They took good care of Matthew until we could get home ASAP. I had a hard time even comprehending that Matt got a DUI, as I wasn't even aware of how much he had been drinking.
This incident stopped the drinking pretty much in its tracks, and he hasn't gotten his license back since either. He's not interested in driving
At all.
About 5 months into that counseling, he started talking to this therapist about, or counselor about, his screams, and so that became more as much a focal point of these sessions as the drug and alcohol counseling. It was apparent that he wasn't using the alcohol at that point anyway. And so when that session ended after a year, she recommended seeing someone at another counselor, and he started working on that. But also, he ended up having another incident where he was out yelling in the fields, and he ended up getting arrested for disturbing the peace. And so he had to go see a counselor at Health and Welfare for that. But that counselor told him that he might have schizophrenia, and he didn't like that. And so he kind of stopped doing that part of the program. And for another 3 or 4 years, we were going he was living at home. He would have these screams. He would be talking with Paul at the police department, and he'd be sitting out, Paul Klykowski, for those that might not know his last name. Anyhow, he'd be sitting out in the bushes at nighttime with his video camera, tape recorder, trying to catch these screams, because he was gonna get this situation solved. But they were also onto him, and so they were bugging our house and had cameras and listening equipment, and he went to all kinds of lengths to booby trap the house so that he could catch them coming to the house. So again, went on for a long time. And sometime in around 2014, we ended up going on a trip to Nevada with our son. Bonnie's uncle and father, they were going to be moving up, and so we were doing some estate sales. Matt was helping us with that. And one morning when we were working on that, he decided that he was going to go back to Bonnie's dad's house. It was just a quarter mile down the road. Well, he never ended up doing that.
He was going to church.
He was going to go to church, but he ended up walking around the roads in Nevada. It was 99 degrees outside. He had no water. He was yelling, and he was seeing things, and a police officer found him, and he took him to the hospital.
Who happened to live across the street from my father.
Another small world situation. And so that was another situation where he was in the hospital. I mean, we realized he was missing, and we called the police, and eventually we all got hooked up. And so they put him on a medication and then recommended he see a therapist when he got to Moscow, and so we kind of started doing that process. A couple weeks later, he decided to check himself into the program down at St. Joe's, the 72-hour self-hold, where he actually got evaluated, diagnosed, and they started putting on the outpatient program there. And so from there, he kind of realized that he might have schizophrenia. And so he's been staying on his medications. We feel extremely fortunate that we have a son that's been able to realize, to the extent that he realized them, because he still has situations where he hears these screams. But he stays on his medication. He talks to us. He has a therapist that he sees. Since he's been diagnosed, he's been able to be on disability. He lives on his own, but he comes to our place a couple nights a week and does his laundry and things of that nature. Bonnie's a pretty as a bedrock for him in terms of just coming and talking and getting grounded and making sure everything's going okay. Matt's had a remarkable adventure in life. We think he's one of the bravest people we know, having to go through what he's gone through. As far as the recovery center goes, Matt's been there a couple times. He's not very comfortable talking in a group situation. He's much more comfortable talking one-on-one. However, he even realizes, because he has a couple other friends that have been diagnosed with schizophrenia and other mental illnesses, and they use that facility and have nothing but the best of words to say. We also know that every now and then Matt had 2 72-hour holds, and don't want to give out erroneous information. We heard somewhere that St. Joe's that the mental illness might be closing down, but we haven't been able to confirm that necessarily. However, that being said, if it were to close, the crisis center is another great resource that our town has. That you don't have to go down to Lewiston if you have a crisis of that nature. That they're available 23 hours and 59 minutes a day is going to be a great resource. It also is going to keep people maybe going to Gritman when that's not really the type of care that they need. So our time is up. We want to thank you for indulging us.
And the other thing too is we would walk through the crisis center once a month to go to the LAMI meeting, Latah Alliance for Mental Illness, which was a lifesaver for us. I happened to see a thing in the paper about it. Without them, I'm not quite sure what we would have done. I was at wit's end, tying knots in the rope, trying to figure out what to do. There was nobody. There was nothing and no one to turn to. It's not something that I felt comfortable blabbing to my neighbors and saying, hey, would you happen to know? But what I have found is that if I do say something to someone, what I often get back is, oh, my brother or my uncle, my mother, and I'm often surprised at not how much mental illness, but how people are touched so often with mental illness in their family. I do wish that the crisis center was available at that time, and I'm so glad it is now. I would do anything to support the crisis center. And it is the one place that Matthew can go into, and he has said this more than once, where he feels safe, protected, he's not an outsider, that he can just be him. And
Thank you very much.
thank you.
Bonnie and Andy, thank you for that story and how important you are in this community. Just know that, please. At this time, table captains, if you could get out your envelopes and start working your table and pleating on those heartstrings a little bit, that would be good. And those of you viewing online, you can go to the Latah Recovery website, Latah Recovery Center and click on Contact and Support. And following that simple PayPal instructions on that at the bottom of the page, and please donate generously. So at this time, it's my pleasure to introduce Lord Jeff Conrad. And we'll let him explain about that title, Lord, in a minute. Jeff has served as the CEO of St. Vincent de Paul of North Idaho, where he worked with many vulnerable populations and those in deep poverty. He was also state chair of the Homeless Coalition. His past experiences also included Assistant Scout Executive for the local Boy Scouts, where he first worked with Daryl Kine, and then other leadership roles, and he'll share a little bit more about them. He now runs a consulting firm called Conrad Leadership Consulting, and he's really working with clients to improve on their little things that make a big difference. So with that, please help me welcome Jeff Conrad.
It's so refreshing to speak in front of people. About 3 weeks ago, I spoke for a library foundation on a Zoom meeting, and you're trying to be funny and witty, and all you see are people's initials. There's no snickers, there's no smiles. So I start every meeting off with a song. So if anyone's familiar with the Grand Duke of York, the Grand Duke of York, he has 10,000 men, he marches up the hill and he marches down again. Because when you're up, and when you're down, but when you're only halfway up, you're neither up or down. Got it? Got it? Okay, so I need everyone to stand up. There's motions to this. And they're front motions. So everyone's going to start with their hands on their knees. And he goes to the Grand Duke of York. He had 10,000 men. He marched them up the hill, and he marched down again. Because when you're up, and when you're down. But when you're only halfway up, you're neither up or down. Faster. Grand Duke of York. He had 10,000 men. He marched them up the hill, and he marched down again. Because when you're up, and when you're down. But when you're only halfway up, you're neither up or down. Faster. Grand Duke of York. He had 10,000 men. He marched up the hill, and he marched down again. When you're up, when you're down. When you're halfway up, you're up, down. Hyperspeed. Just sit down. Now this is how it goes, is if the Latah Recovery Center doesn't raise a lot of money, then we sing another song. Is that pretty fair? So, I have a speech that I was going to bring tonight, and I spent a good portion of my day with Daryl at the Latah Recovery Center. My background is I spent 16 years working with the Boy Scouts of America. I got to work with Daryl. I left the Boy Scouts to become the executive director of the United Way of North Idaho. And probably to this day, probably one of the most fun jobs I've ever had. And then I left there to become the CEO of St. Vincent de Paul of North Idaho. And St. Vincent de Paul, North Idaho and Latah Recovery Center are very similar in many ways. St. Vincent de Paul, North Idaho has low-income housing, over 300 apartments of low-income housing, a women's and children's shelter, the only men's emergency shelter in the 5 northern counties, a dining hall, and yada, yada, yada. There's a lot of stuff. It's 103 employees and a $7 million budget, and I was really proud of the work we did there. And I felt humbled going to the Latah Recovery Center. Let me tell you a little something about your boy Daryl. Daryl started working for the Boy Scouts. How far out of college were you, Daryl? 2-3 years?
Let's round it to that, sure.
Okay, 2 or 3 years. He's, he had his basset hounds and his small kids. Did you have kids at that time? Yeah.
I had basset hounds.
Daryl was this awkward, gawky, tall guy, and I'm shy and unassuming, and and Daryl's very, 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 very quiet. And I left the Boy Scouts in 2003, and I don't know how much longer Daryl worked for the Boy Scouts, but for some reason Daryl and I have kept in touch. And Paul's comment tonight, and his exact comment was, Daryl has found his lane. Visiting the Recovery Center for me was a highlight. And watching Daryl
in that environment and watching the talk about the way he talks about the team that he has and the volunteers that he has. Daryl truly does understand that everything is boiled down to a relationship, and he gets it. And the feeling in this room and the work that he's doing and that you all are doing at the Latah Recovery Center shows that. One quote Daryl said to me, and I remembered this all single day, he was giving me the $2 tour. And we got halfway down the hall and he goes, we don't have to, there's nothing more down there because it's all about the people. Daryl gets it. That's exactly right. So I was asked to come speak about leadership. And you've got one heck of a leader leading Latah Recovery Center and the programs that are going on. Have I been the chairman of the state of Idaho's Homeless Association? Yeah. I can tell you stories, but nothing is going to compare to what's going on here locally. The community that you have here in Moscow supports the Latah Recovery Center. And it shows. And it's so cool because during the age of COVID, you have this many people showing up for dessert and supporting the center. I was here at 7 o'clock this morning eating a breakfast burrito, and there was, what, 30, 40 people there this morning? And there's an unknown amount of people online. So it's really cool. And I applaud you for what you're doing. So let's give yourself a round of applause. Mr. and Mrs. Boyd, where are you? They left. Heard stories like that so many times. They are handling it so well. It's rough, and God bless them. I wish them the very, very best. So in talking about leadership, let's talk about leadership. I've only got 10 minutes, so how much more time have I got, Daryl? 20, 30 minutes. One of the best things that I learned about leadership is that there is no really such thing as leadership skills or business skills or work life or home life. It's just life. And the skills that we learn throughout our life are skills that we have for our life tool belt. And when I talk about leadership, people were saying, well, that's a leadership skill. Getting along with others, learning to cooperate, collaborate, and step up and help your community is not a leadership skill. That's a life skill. We all want communities that have people like that. So I'm going to talk real briefly about some things that when I was at St. Vinny's, these are some of the things that we really push. And these are the things that I push now. First and foremost, I believe that anybody who can influence change is a leader. Anybody. About 47% of my staff at St. Vinny's, 47% of the 103 employees I had were currently clients. So whenever I would say that, I would say, hey, anybody who can influence change is a leader. I would invariably have one hand go up and say, yeah, that's above my pay grade. Until I started working with them. We had a program called Vinny University. I'm a huge Disney fanatic. I love all the parks. I used to say, our leadership is going to be like Disney leadership at St. Vincent de Paul. We don't have cool water rides unless the toilets overflow, but we have a really cool program. And we would do that, and I would run all my staff through this leadership program. And the final of this program was they had to pair up and come up with a business plan for St. Vincent's, and it had to be in one of three areas. One, a new program. Two, modifying an existing program. Or three, a money-saving program. I don't care how you present it. It can be on chalkboard as far as I care. But you got to have a handout, you got to have a budget, you got to have a plan, you got to have a timeline, you got to have staff resources. What are you going to need? We approved 99% of those projects, and they got to lead them. And that's how when I went, anybody who can influence change as a leader, when they said, oh, that's above my pay grade, 8 weeks later, they were the most chattiest converts you'd ever meet in your life. Because they got to lead a project in their own department. And that was fun. The other thing that we really talked about was focus on your family, friends, and your community. Focus on your family, friends, and community. Get to know people around you. Don't become a recluse. Go out and let people know you and get to know your friends. Get to know your coworkers. Get to know their families. Get to know their situation. I can tell you, in 30 years of doing nonprofit work, I'm still friends with all my board presidents. Because it's built on that relationship. It's because I got to know them, and I know their kids, and I know their grandkids. Get to know your team, get to know their families, get to know their situation. So when you walk up and say, hey, how's your husband Bob doing? Or, you know, how's your kids doing? You know, how's so-and-so doing in school? It builds relationships, and it builds stability in friendships. Next one is make yourself aware of how you are in the community. I always like to tell my staff, you want people in the community to go, hey, you work for St. Vincent de Paul. You never, ever want anyone to go, you work for St. Vincent de Paul? You want to be a person that someone wants to know. So be aware of how you act in the community. The other one is listening to others. There's a phrase called active listening. And active listening means listening to someone without already having your answer locked and loaded. When someone's talking and you're going, because I'm ready. Actively listen to what they're trying to say. There's a great phrase called understand before you can be understood. Understand where people are coming from. In the world today, I truly believe if 99% of the world would actually listen and communicate actively, the world's problems would be solved. I really do. Another one is service. You know, at Vinny's we used to say we want to provide customer service so exceptional that people have no choice but to talk about us. But it goes for us as civilians as well. Be someone in the community that volunteers your time, that donates your time to a school, to a church, to a community, plant flowers. Give back into the community. It makes you a better person. Common sense is not always common practice. So what I always say is educate yourself. Educate yourself on your gaps. What are you good at and what are you not good at? And what things that you're not good at, learn. The internet's amazing. Do not get your news from Facebook. Do not get your news from LinkedIn. It's Facebook, not Factbook. But get your news from a reputable source. Adapt. Do not adopt. Everyone's got their own value system. Stick with your value system. Just because someone else is doing it differently doesn't mean you need to adapt or to adopt to their system. Stick with your own system. Adapt to it. And always focus on the future. Where are you going to be 3, 5, 10 years from now? What do you need to get there? What barriers are in your way? Identify those barriers and how do you remove those barriers? Some barriers seem like you'll never be able to replace them. But what are they? And if you need help, ask for it. The last one's relationships. I am a firm believer that anything you have in life, anything I have in life, good, bad, or indifferent, is based upon a relationship you have with another human being. If things good happen to you, that's because you have good relationships. If things bad happen to you, it's because you have bad relationships. But everything comes down to the relationship. I put in here, you cannot resolve conflict or differences if your relationship isn't grounded on mutual respect and trust. It's about the relationship. And going back to Daryl and his team, the Latah Recovery Center is truly about the relationship. I am honored and privileged to be here tonight, and I'm going to leave you with one last quote. You are the CEO of your life. Hire, fire, and promote accordingly. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeff. And one small omission was Lord. Come on. Let's hear it.
So a couple weeks ago, I my daughter got me the gift, I guess, and I wish more countries did this. They have a reserve, a land reserve in Scotland, and you can buy a 10-foot by 10-foot square of land. So it comes with a GPS picture, and I get a card, and all sort of cool stuff. But because I own land in Scotland, I am now Lord Jeff Conrad. And if you're Scottish, it's Laird. So, very happy.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Jeff. At this time, I'd like to invite Dave Hutton up to the stage. And he's a member of the board of the Latah Recovery Center and active in the local recovery community, and owners of Short's Funeral Chapel, for many of you that know that. It's really this commitment of community leaders like Dave and so many of you in the audience tonight that really make it possible for the center to do wonderful things that it does here in Latah County. So, Dave, please join me. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul and Lord Conroy. As was mentioned, I'm Dave Hutton. I've been, turns out I had an unhealthy relationship with alcohol, and about 12 years ago I fixed that. So hopefully I'm all right. But I'd like to talk to you today about, you've heard a lot about the Recovery Center. And when you're making out those pledge cards, you know, with the COVID, this is nice to be able to be social without being socially distant, as it were. We've already raised about $25,000 prior to the events today, which is awesome. But you need to know to sustain the programs we talked about, expand our programs throughout the area, staff the crisis center, and work with a variety of local and state governments. We need $250,000 a year to run things. This money helps operate our resource room, provides group support, train volunteers, and much more. You're an important part of that, because most of our money comes from our community, for our community. And we'd like to ask you tonight to make any support you can. We would like, well, if you could donate $100, maybe more. If you want to put it on your credit card, we can do that. If you want to become a sustaining member, we can do it every week if you'd like. But you can also do it online for the people zooming in, latahrecoverycenter.org, and there's a contact and support tab that Paul mentioned. If you haven't already done so, please take time to fill out your pledge card, give it to your table captain or and our volunteers will come and get them in a few minutes. So while you're doing that, I would like to introduce Wendy Stoneberg. She's going to join us virtually to speak about Hutton, Idaho, and their important services. Thank you for your time, and thank you for your support of the Recovery Center. Their important services. Thank you for your time.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me here tonight.
Their important services.
Wendy Stoneberg, and I work with Hutton. Hi, everyone. Thank you for share a little bit about Hutton, Idaho, what we do, how our mission aligns with the work that's happening at Latah Recovery Center. Hutton manages the Idaho Behavioral Health Plan, and what that means is that we contract with mental health professionals to provide outpatient services to the Medicaid population. Those individuals that are receiving Medicaid are our members, and the providers are helping them on their own journey to recovery and wellness. I am part of this amazing team. We have some staff who actually live in your region. Karen Kopp is our provider relations advocate, and she was there this morning. We have a field care coordinator who works directly with members, sometimes with the members and the providers on some of the tougher cases. And then we also have a quality specialist who is an additional resource for the providers in the area. My role is that of community program manager, and I cover everything from Ada County, west, and all the way up north, so regions 1 through 4. And I have what I consider the best job because I get to actually interact with different community organizations like the Recovery Center and figure out how we can be better partners and what we can do to include not just the organization that we're working with, but the community as a whole. How do we bring resiliency to your community? At Optum, we believe in helping one person, one family, and one community at a time. And we really believe that it's critical to invest in our communities. Daryl and the staff and volunteers at Latah Recovery Center invest in your community every day by providing wonderful opportunities for those in recovery. Doesn't matter what it is, they are providing so many of the scheduled meetings, whether they're in person or virtual, the monthly newsletter, the weekly radio show. These are all ways to engage and encourage individuals in recovery. And it is also a way to engage your community. They do so many different events, and it's always community-based, and I love that. During the past year, where just one more thing was added on top of what's normally for some people, and including me, can be a struggle, the pandemic brought some things, definitely some bad things, but there were also some good things that came out of it. One of the things that I really, really enjoyed was Recovery Month and all of the wonderful signs that were posted around the community. Daryl came and said, this is what we want to do here, those inspirational messages, you matter, the world needs you, you're important. Those were important, not just to the recovery community, but to the entire community. And Daryl was so great to share that idea with the other recovery centers around the state, and we were able to help replicate that. So 9 of the recovery community centers actually had those signs posted. So it made an impact on a lot of people around the state. Remember, now more than ever, it's so important to stay connected, whether it's virtual or in person. We, last year, actually in 2019, our team worked on a campaign, and it's a statewide platform to reduce isolation, to foster inclusion, and help start important and sometimes really difficult conversations about well-being. And that campaign is called Hello, Idaho. When we looked at that in the fall of 2019, we had absolutely no idea that it was going to become so important in 2020. So what I encourage you to do is be a part of that. It's as simple as seeing someone alone, reaching out and saying hello. You just never know how a simple hello is going to impact an individual on a certain day. So if you'd like more information about that, our website is optum.com/Hello Idaho. You can learn more about the materials that we have. They can be downloaded. They can be used in your schools, in your business, in your community organization. You can also send in a request form, an email form, and we will actually mail you everything free of charge, whether it's posters, stickers, bookmarks, anything that we have on there. We want to make sure that communities are using those. As you think about what does resilient mean, it means to be able to recover from something that was difficult. And Latah Recovery Center, their staff and their volunteers, they are resilient, and they are helping the folks that come into from the community, and they're helping them become resilient. And each time they help an individual, that impacts that individual's family and makes an impact on your community. So I'm going to wrap this up. I appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight. I am really excited to see how the fundraising goes, so everybody remember and get those donations in. And thank you so much for allowing me this time.
Thank you, Wendy, and thank you all for being here tonight. And as Greg Mann comes up, I just want to thank you for keeping that light of hope shining bright. Thank you. So, Board President. Great man.
I would now like to offer a sincere thank you from all of us at the Latah Recovery Center to Paul Kimmel for once again serving as the MC of this event. Jeff spoke about the importance of community service, and I feel that Paul represents all that is good about public service. Over the years, Paul has contributed a great deal to make the community a better place. I have a tremendous amount of respect and admiration for Paul and consider him to be a mentor of mine. Thank you, Paul, for all that you do for the Latah Recovery Center. Can we give him an applause? Also, I too want to thank all of you for being here this evening. You're a really, really huge part of the success of the Latah Recovery Center. I hope you had a good evening, and thank you so much for being here. And with that, we look forward to seeing you next year. Thank you.
Thank you.